Shalom. Shalom, Israel. Shalom. It's your brother Gabriel coming to you. Doing a quick live session real quick on a lesson I was supposed to do earlier today. But yeah, man, we're gonna go ahead and get into it, man. It's the lesson on Romans chapter 2, verse 28 and 29, right? And before I get started, first off, I want to give all praises to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Bakakodash, right? And man, let's go ahead and get started, man, because it's a common thing where Christians, Christians and people who come against this gospel, they'll come and say that Romans 2 and 28 is talking about you don't have to be a Jew outwardly, but a Jew inwardly, thinking that that means that, hey, you can be of these other nations and still get the salvation of the Israelites, or be of these other nations, and that this gospel is for you, and that this gospel is for the other nations, when that's not actually true. That's not what Romans chapter 2, verse 28 is actually talking about. And we're going to go into that today and break down what Romans chapter 2, verses 28 and 29 is really going into, right? So let's go ahead and get started, man. Right? Because I got a few scriptures, man. So look, I'm going to go ahead, jump to the book of Romans chapter 2, verse 28, right? And it says, "For he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision, which is outward in the flesh. But he is a Jew, which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai." Right? So let's go ahead and break it down line by line, man, right? It says, "For he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision, which is outward in the flesh," right? So to really, man, get the gist of what these two verses are actually saying, we got to kind of go up a little bit, and we got to go in the context, right? So look, let's start off at verse 24, right? It says, "For the name of the Most High is blasphemed among the Gentiles through you, as it is written, for circumcision verily profiteth little, if thou Salakia, for circumcision verily profiteth, if thou keep the law, but if thou be a breaker of the law, thy circumcision is made uncircumcision." Right? So, and that's true. What that verse is saying is, yeah, you may be circumcised outwardly in the flesh, but if you're not keeping the law, statutes, and commandments, if you're not truly doing the law, statutes, and commandments, what does your circumcision mean? It's just something symbolic. You know what I'm saying? It's just something of the flesh, and there's not really anything of the spirit, right? And it says, and let's go to verse 26. "Therefore, if the uncircumcision keep the righteousness of the law, shall not his uncircumcision be counted for circumcision? And shall not uncircumcision, which is by nature, if it fulfill the law, judge thee, who by the letter and circumcision doest transgress the law?" Doest transgress the law, right? So what's that saying? So what that is saying, man, is if somebody's uncircumcised, but they're keeping the righteousness of the law, isn't that doesn't that make them circumcised? And as we see in the verses 28 and 29, it's not an outward circumcision, right? Shalom, King, Shalom. Shalom, right? It's not an outward circumcision. You know what I'm saying? Because we're gonna go ahead and get into the Jews and the Gentile things here in a second. But if you're circumcised in the spirit, meaning you're keeping the righteousness of the law, statutes, and commandments, you know what I'm saying? You're not committing adultery. You're not willfully sinning. You're not willfully going against the Most High. You got your beard. You know what I'm saying? You're not shaving off your natural line and going bald, things like that. You're not doing these things, and amongst other things that the law, statutes, and commandments contain. You're not doing these things, not having hatred towards your brother. You know what I'm saying? Not murdering, killing, or anything like that. Right? Not extorting, not taking advantage of people, not you know what I'm saying? Things like that. If you're keeping the righteousness of the law, but you're not circumcised in the flesh, doesn't that mean I have righteousness? You know what I'm saying? In the spirit? And that's what verse 29 is saying, right? But he is a Jew, which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart in the spirit and not in the letter. So the circumcision is in the spirit, it's in the heart, right? Because we're going to get into it too. Matter of fact, let me go ahead and bring a couple precepts out for that, right? Going to the Apocrypha. Because in them times, man, the Gentiles, because Paul was a minister to the Gentiles, but the Gentiles, they didn't grow up naturally. The Gentiles who were Israelites, right? We got to make that clear first. The Gentiles were Israelites that there's talking about in the New Testament, but they didn't grow up naturally knowing that they were Israelites or Jews, and they didn't have those, they didn't grow up with those same customs, right? Because you know what I'm saying? So like, and then there's another thing too. I can't remember what scripture it is, but where Paul was saying, you know, do these things, you know, don't eat meat that's strangled, you know what I'm saying? Stay away from fornication, things like that, because I don't want to burden you with the whole law, because they didn't have the whole law. They didn't grow up naturally with those customs, right? So they didn't want to burden them as an adult. You didn't want to burden somebody as an adult with circumcision just yet. You know what I'm saying? So what Paul was saying is that, hey, yeah, you might not be circumcised outwardly, but if you keep that circumcision inwardly, you know what I'm saying? If you do the things what that circumcision is actually supposed to represent, living set apart, living a holy life, shouldn't that count as circumcision, right? But let's see. Let's get into how this actually happened, right? This is the book of First Maccabees, chapter 1, verse 11. And it says, in those days went there out of Israel wicked men who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us. For since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. And what this is going into during the Maccabean area and the Maccabean revolt, when the Greeks, you know what I'm saying, they sought to, you know what I'm saying, make all of the nations leave their own customs, their own heritage, and their own laws, and become one people and follow the Greeks, right? And we're going to read that here in a second. And it says, so this device pleased them well. Then certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinance of the heathen, whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem, according to the customs of the heathen, right? So the Greeks were trying to make them, you know what I'm saying, comply with the customs of the Greeks and do heathenistic customs. You know what I'm saying? Which we'll see, you know, they were sacrificing pork on the altar, you know, unclean animals, you know what I'm saying, living an unclean life, wearing the togas and everything like that, right? So look, we're going to read this in verse 15. Check this out. And it says, and made themselves uncircumcised and forsook the holy covenant, right? So if you're circumcised in the flesh already, logic will tell you you can't make yourself uncircumcised. You know what I'm saying? You can't go back and find some foreskin and put it back on you. You know what I'm saying? You can't do that. So what verse 15 is talking about spiritually uncircumcised. It says, and made themselves uncircumcised and forsook the holy covenant and joined themselves to the heathen and were sold to do mischief. Right? So that's what that's talking about. There were Jews back then, there were Israelites back then during the Maccabean times. They forsook the holy covenant, they forsook the law, statutes, and commandments, and spiritually became uncircumcised, right? Let's go down to verse 41. And it says, moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, right? So they were trying, so the Greeks and King Antiochus at that time was trying to make everybody one people, everybody who was under who the Greeks had conquered. They were trying to make them one people and were trying to make them forget about who they were and what their heritage and nationality was. They wanted everybody to be Greek, right? And it says, and everyone should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. So the other heathen, the other nations, they were going along with it. They were just, you know what I'm saying, kind of just following suit, following orders, right? And it says, yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion and sacrificed unto idols and profaned the Sabbath. For the king has sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem and the cities of Judah that they should follow the strange laws of the land, right? And forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Sabbaths and festival days, right? So they were saying, hey, you got to leave off your customs. Forget your Sabbath day, forget your high holy days, forget the feast days, forget the new moon feast and everything. Y'all got to do what we want you to do. You got to follow these Greek customs over here, right? So that's becoming uncircumcised in the spirit, right? Forgetting the law, statutes, and commandments, forgetting the holy covenant or forsaking the holy covenant, right? Right. So verse 46, and it says, and pollute the sanctuary and holy people, set up altars and groves and chapels of idols, and sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beasts, right? And it says that they should also leave their children uncircumcised, right? And this is talking about the fleshly circumcision, right? That they should leave also their children uncircumcised and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation, to the end that they might forget the law and change all the ordinances, right? And whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said he should die, right? So, Shabbat Shalom, Judah 7781, right? So King Antiochus, man, was telling the Israelites, you got to forget your laws, your statutes, and your commandments. And if you try and keep those laws, statutes, and commandments, and try and keep your customs, we're going to kill you, right? And as we read earlier in verse, in verse 11, you know what I'm saying? A lot of the Jews, a lot of the Israelites, they made a covenant with the heathen. They consented to do that. They said, yeah, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do that, right? And then also you got to remember that there were Israelites scattered across that whole region at that time, right? You had Greeks, you had Israelites in Macedonia, Philippi, Ephesus, you know what I'm saying? Even in Spain, right? Because Paul traveled to Spain. You know what I'm saying? So we had our people, the Israelites, were scattered all over that region, and they were keeping the customs of the heathen. And at that time, you know what I'm saying? They were growing up not knowing that a lot of them were growing up not knowing that they were Israelites, which is why they called themselves Greeks. A lot of them called themselves Greeks. That word Greek in the New Testament does not mean an actual Edomite. It's not mean a white man with stringy hair. You know what I'm saying? It's not talking about the Edomites. It's not talking about those people. It's talking about Israelites who grew up in Greek customs, right? So let's go back to Romans, right? I'm gonna start at 25. It says, "For circumcision verily profiteth if thou keep the law. But if thou be a breaker of the law, thy circumcision is made uncircumcision," right? So who was given the law? The Israelites, right? Let's go bring that out. Let's go to Psalms chapter 78, verse 5. And it says, "And he established a Salakia, for he established a testimony in Jacob," talking about Yahweh Bashim, Yahweh Shah. "For he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, even the children which should be born, who should arise and declare them to their children," right? So the law, statutes, and commandments were given to the Israelites, right? We can go even further. Let's go to Psalms chapter 147, verse 19. Right? And it says, "He showeth his word unto Jacob, his statutes and his judgments unto Israel." Right? So the law, statutes, and commandments were only given to the Israelites. So let's look at it like this. If you gave me, if somebody gave, or if my mother or my father, if they gave me a glass, right? Right? If they gave me a special glass, right? And it had a list of instructions written on it, you know what I'm saying? To make sure that it's separated from every other glass in the house, right? And they only gave it to me. They didn't give it to my brothers. They didn't give it to my sisters. They didn't give it to the neighbors' kids down the street or nothing like that. They only gave this glass to me, and they wrote certain instructions and things like that on there for me to keep. And I break that glass, right? Well, who's the only one who can break that glass if it's only in my possession, if it was only given to me, and I never gave it or showed it to anybody else? I kept it myself. Who's the only one who can break that glass? Me, right? So the only people who can break the law, statutes, and commandments were the Israelites, right? Because they were the only ones who received the law, statutes, and commandments, right? So, you know what I'm saying? So let's go ahead and get some kind. That's plain right there. That's plain, right? So let's go ahead and get back into it, right? Go back to verse 25. It says, "For circumcision verily profiteth if thou keep the law. But if thou be a breaker of the law, thy circumcision is made uncircumcision," right? So we got to also think about what's going on back then at those times, right? Because you had what was called the wicked scribes and Pharisees, right? You had Jews, you had Israelites who taught the law, but they didn't necessarily keep the law themselves, right? So and what this scripture is saying, if you don't keep the law, but you are circumcised in the flesh, does it really matter? Does it really matter if you circumcised in the flesh and you extorting your brother, you taking advantage of him? You know what I'm saying? You sleeping with his wife. You know what I'm saying? You eating pork. You doing all of these things, right? If you're not following the law, statutes, and commandments, but yet you're circumcised in the flesh, does it really matter? Let's bring this out, right? We're going to go to the book of Matthew. Chapter 5, verse 20, right? And it says, "For I say unto you, that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven," right? So what is Yahushua talking about? If your righteousness doesn't exceed the scribes and the Pharisees, right? Let's go ahead and jump to Matthew chapter 23. Because the scribes and the Pharisees, they were masters of the law. They knew the law like the back of their hand. But does that mean that they kept them? Right? Let's see. Right? This is Matthew chapter 23 and verse 1. Then spake Yahushua to the multitude and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. But do not ye after their works, for they say and do not. For they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers, right? So what the scribes and the Pharisees, the wicked scribes and the Pharisees were doing, they were preaching and teaching the law and saying, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do this, you got to do that according to the laws of Moses, right? But they themselves weren't keeping the law, right? They would say, you got to do this and you got to do that, but they would be hypocrites because then you would see them and they'd go do the opposite. And Yahushua knew that through the Spirit, right? Through the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. And that's why Yahushua was calling them out and was bringing that out, that, hey, yeah, do what they say, because they are teaching you right. They're teaching you to do the right thing. They're teaching you to follow the law, statutes, and commandments, right? That's why it says the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, right? And who gave Israel, you know what I'm saying, through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bash and Yahweh Shah, who gave Israel the law, statutes, and commandments? Moses did, right? So it wasn't, you know what I'm saying, it wasn't talking about anything else, right? Let's bring this out too. Let's go to the book of Mark, chapter 7, verse 2. This is the book of Mark, chapter 7, verse 2. It says, and when they say some of his disciples eat bread with defiled, that is to say, with unwashed hands, they found fault, right? So, you know, the disciples of Yahweh Shah, you know, Peter and them and everybody, they was eating and they didn't wash their hands, right? And it says, for the Pharisees and all the Jews, except they wash their hands off, eat not, holding the tradition of the elders, right? And when they came from the market, except they wash, they eat not. And many other things there be, which they have received to hold, as the washing of cups and pots, brazen vessels, and of tables. Then the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, why walk not thy disciples according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? Right? So the Pharisees were like, hey, man, why y'all ain't following after the traditions of the elders that set before you, man? You got to wash your hands before you eat this food. You know what I'm saying? Why you not doing that, right? And this was what Yahushua said. He answered and said unto them, well hath Isaiah prophesied of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men, right? And that is you can find that in Isaiah 29:13, right? Where it talks about, you know what I'm saying, the people who, you know, out of their mouth they praise the Most High, but their heart is far from them, because they speak, you know what I'm saying, they speak good things, but they don't keep the ways of the Most High, right? And this is howbeit, Salakia, this is verse 8. For laying aside the commandment of Yahweh, ye hold the tradition of men, as the washing of pots and cups, and many other such like things ye do. And he said unto them, full well ye reject the commandment of Yahweh, that ye may keep your own tradition, right? So we're saying you wicked scribes and Pharisees, you're rejecting the commandments. You're rejecting that the law, statutes, and commandments that the Most High gave to you. But yet you want us to keep these traditions of men. And it don't work like that, right? Let's go ahead and bring out another account of the same thing in the book of Matthew. It's Matthew chapter 15, verse 17, right? And it says, "Do not ye yet," and this is the same account, but or a different account, same event, right? This is Matthew chapter 15, verse 17. It says, "Do not ye yet understand that whatsoever entereth in the mouth goeth into the belly and is cast out into the drought," right? "But those things which proceed out of the mouth come forth from the heart, and they defile the man," right? So what it's saying is, those things, man, that you speak, those things that you do, those things that you say, man, that's what defiles you, right? Following, because they were trying to get them to follow the traditions of men. You know what I'm saying? You got to wash your hands, and Yahweh Shah was like, don't you understand that, hey, it's just dirt. You know what I'm saying? It's going to be cast out. You know what I'm saying? When I go to the bathroom. You feel me? So, it's not what goes in you, and it's not talking about unclean foods, right? For all of those people who, for all you Christians who twist this and want to say that that's talking about unclean foods, it's not talking about unclean foods. It's talking about, you know what I'm saying? It's talking about the things that proceed out of your mouth, the words you speak. For life and death is in the tongue. You know what I'm saying? Right? What a man says for out of the heart, you know what I'm saying? For out of a heart is what a man is going to speak. You know what I'm saying? So that's what defiles you. That's what makes you, you know what I'm saying? That's kind of what this is going into in Romans chapter 2, verse 28, right? Let me go back to it. And let's read it again. Right? We're going to read Romans chapter 2 and 28 one more time. And I'm going to close it out, right? And it says, "For he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh." Right? So if we put this in context with the first 3 verses before this, you know what I'm saying? It's talking about actually following the law, statutes, and commandments, and not just looking the part, right? It don't matter how big your fringes is, how long your fringes are. It don't matter if you were circumcised on the 8th day. You know what I'm saying? It don't matter if you you know what I'm saying, how big your beard is. You know what I'm saying? It don't matter how you know, the outward appearance of looking like a Jew. That doesn't matter so much as to what's going on inside of you, what's in your mind, what's in your heart. And do you actually follow the law, statutes, and commandments? Are you following in the spirit? You know what I'm saying? It says, "But he is a Jew, which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart." Are you actually following the commandments? Are you actually, you know what I'm saying, loving your brothers, loving your fellow neighbor, loving your sisters? Are you actually, you know what I'm saying, not being a hypocrite? Are you, you know what I'm saying, teaching, but also keeping and doing? Are you doing with that which you teach? Right? It's also another verse that says, you know what I'm saying, is thou teach, does not thou teach yourself? You know what I'm saying? So if you're going to teach, you actually got to teach yourself. You got to do these things yourself. Right? So that's what this is going into in Romans chapter 2 and verse 28. Man, Lord willing, this video, this quick live was edifying. You know what I'm saying? Shalom to all of those who are out there listening, seeking, learning. You know what I'm saying? To the hopeful elected nation of Israel. Again, Lord willing, this video was edifying. And until the next one, shalom.